Welcome to this week's episode of Rookie Roulette, where we focus on just a specific rookie. We're just going to kind of go through and analyze what their season has looked like so far, and then we'll dive into an interview with a guest who kind of covers or specializes in that team specifically. This week we have Bub Carrington, Carlton Carrington, and later on we'll have an interview with Matt Modderno from Believe in Wizards podcast. Really fun interview. He provided a ton of insight into Bub's season so far, what he likes, dislikes, and then also some. We just kind of touched on the growth and impact so far of other young players like Bilal Koulibaly, Alex Sarr, and Keyshawn George. But since we are focused on Bub this week, let's kind of take a look at where he ended up last year, how his season's going so far. A lot of good, a lot of bad. Interesting mix of numbers, though. So, Bub Carrington, rookie point guard, out of Pittsburgh. He was a one and done there, kind of one of the more surprising one and done players. At Pittsburgh, he showed a ton of really creative offensive creation with his pull up shooting, pick and roll operation, his playmaking, rebounding, piled up triple doubles, especially early in the year. Really kind of exploded onto the scene, but struggled to finish at the rim, struggled on defense, at least consistently on defense, and struggled to shoot off the catch. And we're seeing a lot of those kind of similarities carry over into his rookie year. So last year, Carrington ended up at 17 on the No Ceilings collective big board. He ended up number 11 for me personally and was the 14th pick for the Washington Wizards, along with fellow rookies Alex Sarr and Keyshawn George. One of the big things with Carrington so far is that he's really struggling with his scoring efficiency. When we look at Synergy, who provide incredible and detailed numbers. Overall, he ranks in the 19th percentile in scoring with 0.813 points per possession. He's below the 40th percentile in his three most common play types, which are the pick and roll ball handler, spot up shooting, and in transition. Not ideal. The dribble jumper has been excellent. It's been really, really good as he ranks in the 78th percentile in pull up shooting. But that's really similar to what we saw at Pittsburgh too, where he was one of the most dynamic pull-up shooters in the country. Unfortunately, he's also in the 36th percentile shooting off the catch. Now, why that's a big issue is that 46% of his possessions are coming as the point guard. For a point guard, you would hope that number would be a lot higher. But in the 46% of his possessions at point guard, the team has a net rating of negative 16.4. Bad. But for a team that has 2 wins, all of these advanced team numbers are going to be bad. But what's worse are the 54% of his possessions when he's at shooting guard, where their net rating is negative 23.8. So by taking him off ball so much, the Wizards are kind of negating one of his biggest strengths, which is that pull-up shooting and playmaking. More concerning is that he's in the 8th percentile in at rim finishing and is only shooting like just over 1 free throw a game. That lack of strength and confidence and at rim finishing ability is a big issue at Pittsburgh, and it's even worse now in the NBA. So really concerning. Hopefully it's just a strength based thing where as his body continues to mature and develop and he gets stronger, that's something that improves significantly in the coming years. But right now, it is a really, really big issue. But when we look at kind of his current shooting and scoring efficiency and distribution, it's really, really similar to what we saw in terms of strengths and weaknesses in college. Not totally shocking. All right, let's go over to cleaning the glass to look at some of his advanced numbers. And again, it's a team with 2 wins. It's going to be awful. They're all going to be awful, but some areas trend in a better direction than others. So overall, the Wizards have a net rating of negative 20.5 when he's on the court. Tough. His most common lineup is at 181 possessions, and they have a negative 30.8 net rating, and that is with him, Jordan Poole at point guard, Koulibaly, Kuzma, and Sarr. So again, they keep putting him at the shooting guard position, and Matt and I dive into, what we like and don't like about that and, potential reasoning for it when I talk to him in a few minutes here. Uh, Even more concerning, his 13 most common lineup combinations have a negative net rating that are all in the double digit negatives. Really concerning, but again, it's not all Bub's fault. I promise it's not. A lot of it's lineup construction, and again, it's a team with 2 wins, so all of these advanced team advanced numbers that involve Bub, they're going to be tough. What is really encouraging, though, is that when Bub is on the court with Keyshawn George, Alex Sarr, and Bilal Coulibaly, when those four are on the court and Jordan Poole is off the court, so the reason I specifically removed the reason I specifically removed Poole from that equation is to make sure that Bub was considered the point guard. And these are basically Bub's on ball reps with the rest of their young core. When those four are on the court, they have a net rating of just minus 12.5, but the offense is running really, really smooth. Their offensive rating of 119.1 ranks in the 83rd percentile, and their effective field goal rate when those four are on the floor and Jordan Poole is off is 60.5%. That is insanely high and ranks in the 98th percentile. Those are the kind of things that you really hope to see from a young core figuring out how to play together. Now, the downside is that the defense is awful with a defensive rating of 131.6. It's really bad, but again, four guys who are essentially rookies. Coulibaly is obviously in his second year, but only played like 30 games last year. So four guys who are more or less rookies. The defense is probably always going to be that bad. The more concerning factor is that they only have 115 possessions of those four guys. So hopefully, as the season progresses, we get a lot more substantial sample size of those four playing together because they're the future of this team. And as whether they make some roster moves or shut guys down later in the season, those are the four guys that they need to continue to build around, continue to develop, and build chemistry and figure out what works and what doesn't. Bub has had a really interesting season so far. Stick around for my interview with Matt coming up here shortly, and he provides a ton of info. Go support him. And then after my interview with Matt, we'll respin the wheel, figure out who we have next week. Thanks for tuning in, and let's jump over to my interview with Matt. Very excited to welcome in this week's guest to talk a little Carrington, Bub Carrington. We'll get a clarification on what name we're going with here. But from Believe in Wizards Pod, Bullets Forever, Matt Modderno. Matt, how's it going?
I'm great, man. Thanks for having me. Excited to talk about Bub. He's pretty popular here in the DMV already, so should be a fun combo.
So what's the official nickname or name that we're going with? Because when he was younger, he was Lil Bub Carrington, and then at Pittsburgh last year is mostly Bub.
Yeah.
But first name Carlton. Are we going Carlton? Is it Bub? What's the kind of determination on that?
The team and teammates most commonly refer to him directly as Bub, so I think that's it's fair game for us to go with throughout it.
Sounds good. So Carrington obviously was one and done point guard out of Pittsburgh, 14th pick for the Wizards. One of a trio of young kind of building blocks with Keyshawn George, Alex Sarr. We'll get to those guys more specifically in future episodes. But today we're focusing mostly just on Bub. So I kind of want to just start big picture with, and then we can kind of dive into any numbers or details as we go on. But on draft night, what was your and just kind of the fan base's initial reaction and kind of expectation to the Wizards picking him?
Yeah, so he'd become really popular with the fan base here as a part of the whole pre-draft, and I think there's been like a real desire for that next like guard prospect here in Washington for a while, honestly, maybe since John Wall. And it just, no matter what the Jordan Poole situation or experiment plays out, like you still just needed somebody younger, to develop here in the pipeline. And they just lacked for like a good backup point guard for a long time too. Like they've been a little bit better about that, but mostly their starting point guards have been backup point guards. So I think if you can envision Bub as like this big physical, point guard creator type for the future, like I think that's how Wizards fans kind of got excited about the prospect of him coming in, being local. The Wizards have not traditionally taken a ton of guys from the general area. Like, there's a big Baltimore is not DC thing, but for all intents and purposes, like it's as close as we're going to get to
Right.
one of our own here. And I think that just kind of made him extra popular. It's just like, okay, he's got the Baltimore mentality. There's a lot you hear about that, and he kind of like personifies that. So I think it was a super popular pick. And honestly, I think all three of their picks were largely pretty well received. The SAR narrative changed a little bit after summer league, but and I think the Bub hype kind of grew only more after summer league. So it was popular from the start, and I think it stayed pretty popular here so far throughout the season too.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that you kind of said in there was that point guard of the future, and it's like this feels like the first time in a long time that the Wizards have like a very clear path.
Yep.
Preparing for this and watching film and everything and diving into some of the numbers, they're rough. All of the team's advanced numbers are rough, but that's like, all right, well, they have 2 wins and like an over under right now of 14 or 14 and a half or something for the rest of the year. So it's like, yeah, you'd expect the advanced numbers to be pretty rough. So we're going to try and ignore most of them, but they are what they are. How is he just kind of fitting into the team and what their kind of long-term big picture plans are so far?
Yeah, this is one of the things where I have like I like our new front office here in Washington overall, but I think my few nitpicks would just be, are the things they're letting these guys do as rookies the things that they want them to do or see them do well throughout their career? And I think it's sort of reared its head more on the Alex Sarr front than with Bub so far. But Alex Sarr shooting a lot of threes, and he hasn't shown to be able to make them yet. So is that really what they want from him, to be like almost strictly a pick and pop guy? And for Bub, there's been a decent amount of like off ball stuff. So what do they really envision him as, I think, is going to be interesting. I think fans who just saw like the highlights and the 4 assists, at Pittsburgh were like, oh, this is the point guard. That's the term I use, because I think that's what we saw him come in as. But when you watch Pittsburgh last year, he spent a lot of time off ball there too. So is this just an artifact of like, you've got Jordan Poole there, he takes up so much usage or reps as an on-ball creator that you have to put Bub sort of off ball? Like I just would like to know a little bit more about how they see him and want to envision him for the future. Or is this year, it just seems a lot like there's more like, let's roll the ball out and kind of let them play, like some sloppy pickup, than it is really structured, like let's create like opportunities for these guys to be successful in the eventual role we see them playing. There's not as much like pick and roll creation. Like I don't think I've seen he and Sarr run like any 2-man game at all together this year. And to me, that's a thing I would want to be able to see if they can do. I'm not saying whether they can do that effectively or not, but like, if you're going to be this bad this year, I would try more of those kinds of things and start with the simple stuff and let him kind of expand up. So it's been a little bit of a mixed bag, and it just seems like they're very willing to just let these guys play through things. But then even the return of Malcolm Brogdon, you saw Bub's minutes kind of take a hit there. And there were a couple games where he played, only 15 or 16 minutes, only took 4 or 5 shots, as opposed to playing 28 to 35 minutes and taking a dozen shots. So it's just, it's a little bit of a roller coaster. And I think that's probably what you expect though, with any rookie guard like that.
That the way they're using him really stood out to me too, because it doesn't feel like they're playing into his strengths or kind of
Yeah,
putting him in
exactly.
a position to succeed. And then, like, you even look into the numbers, and this touches on what you just said too, but like 46% of his possessions are at point guard, and they have a net rating of negative 16.4, which is bad, but it's not quite as bad as the 54% of his possessions at shooting guard, where the net rating is negative 23.8. And a lot of that comes with Jordan Poole, and a lot of the Jordan Poole numbers are not ideal.
Sure.
But it also kind of plays into the issues of who Bub is and kind of has been going back to last year as a shooter, where at Pittsburgh last year, he was this dynamic, lethal, off the bounce shooter, pull up shooter, and one of the
Mhm.
best in the country. And his numbers are kind of reflect that as well this year. And off the catch, it's a totally different story. So I don't get why there's so much. Like, I know they have Poole, I know they have Brogdon, but if this guy's your future, if he's your future point guard, why is he not kind of why are the bulk of his minutes not coming at that point guard spot where you can really leverage that two-man game potential, build that
Mhm.
chemistry, use his pull-up shooting threat, use and kind of continue to grow and elevate his playmaking capabilities. It just feels kind of bizarre.
I'm glad to hear you say that as like someone outside of the Wizards fandom bubble here, because sometimes I'm like, all right, am I being overly critical? Does it really matter? Last year, they were seemingly really content to bring Bilal Coulibaly along very
Mm,
slowly and just kind of ease him into more reps and things like that. But this year, like you saw, Bub kind of have the keys in summer league, be on ball considerably more,
yeah,
and he didn't shoot a great percentage, but he was effective, if that makes sense. Like he actually had impact on the game, and I think what you just said, I'm glad the numbers bear that out, because I think that's kind of what we've been seeing. Is like, oh, like when he has the keys and can do some stuff, there were a couple opportunities where he was kind of the lead creator out there. Early in the year, they had a couple of minutes where it was him, Keyshawn George, Bilal Coulibaly, Alex Sarr, and then miscellaneous fifth guy. And they were fun, and they were moving the ball, and they were harder to guard, and it was just kind of scrappy. And they were still doing like dumb rookie stuff when you get that many young guys out on the court together.
right.
But like it's like this is what Wizards fans want to see a whole year of. And I get, like, you have to maybe rehab value of some of these veteran guys, or at least that's what they're trying to do, and haven't been, like, ultimately super successful of milking, the last drop out of these veteran assets. But if that's the hope, and after, like, the trade deadline, they're just gonna hand him the ball and be like, "Here's 35 minutes a game as, like, the on-ball guy," like, I think it's easier to be like, "Okay, I can live with that if that's where we're headed," but just not knowing kinda how they see him and if that actually is the plan, or or what they really envision for him is a part that's like a little harder to wrestle with, or maybe seeing it's like kind of almost a 50-50 split, is maybe they just want to see enough minutes of both early, and then all right, now we've got enough sample size to really make a determination of he's clearly better in one facet than the other. Here's some stuff to work on in the off season. Here's the things we'll continue to kind of feed him, the rest of the year.
That's a really fascinating point, and one I didn't really think of like, all right, they're using this first quarter of the season as like an experiment. Like, all right,
Mhm.
let's figure out like, is there that kind of versatility or not? My concern with that though is like I get that they're planning on being bad, they're supposed to be bad, the expectation is to be bad, whatever, and
Mhm.
that this is a growing season. But my concern with kind of if this minute split of being the one, being the two, kind of the longer it goes, I worry about what kind of habits that
For sure.
instills and like missed opportunities in terms of building that chemistry. Because it
Mhm.
is so freaking hard to be a point guard in the
Yeah.
NBA. Like that threshold is insanely high. And it's like, all right, well, if we if we're already acknowledging that this season there are no expectations to win,
Mhm.
feels like a really, really ideal opportunity to get a guy who physically has a long way to go and is still pretty raw. Feels like a great opportunity to kind of fast track that learning curve.
Yeah, it just they seem very committed to this Jordan Poole experiment. It is better this year. I still it's not my favorite thing to watch personally. There's a large passionate portion of our fan base that would adamantly disagree with me on that he's great, and to each their own. But you just at the very least, when Poole is not in the game, you've got to find every possible minute, I think, for Bub to be the main guy. And like I said, that took a hit with Brogdon coming back. And to me, Brogdon's best value is that he can kind of do either
Yeah.
and be productive. So that seems like a great guy for Bub to learn from and shadow, like similarly sized guys. Neither of them are like the burstiest player. So, if he can pick up little tricks of the trade from him along the way, I think that's great. And if you can have Brogdon be next to him as that off ball guy, but a safety valve, when needed and played them a lot of minutes together. Like, I kind of like that more. It's just like the Poole thing was so bad when he was the off ball guy that you almost can't carve out enough minutes to have Bub on ball and Poole off ball and have them even be like remotely competitive. So it's a weird mix and it's a weird fit, and I think fans would love to see them kind of pick more of a lane in what they're doing, and why, like being more purposeful, or at least obviously purposeful to us
Right.
about what they're trying to get out of it.
Fair. So I feel like you've kind of answered this in one way or the other, but recently Bub's minutes have are trending downwards. He was up around like 30 a game. That's last couple games or a couple weeks. It's dropping a little more towards like 20, 25. Is that purely because of Brogdon kind of getting healthy, coming back to the lineup, or are there potentially some more concerning factors in that?
You'd have like one here or there where, he'd take a couple minute hit, but I do think the more consistent drop off seemed to coincide with Brogdon's like easing back into the lineup. It's sort of right around that like Thanksgiving time frame, and I think that's basically right around the time they were starting to ramp Brogdon back up there too. So it's like you said, you got down into the kind of 20s and things like that. He stopped starting games right after a Knicks loss. So on the 18th, so he's kind of moved more into that bench role. I don't know if it's something they saw, if it's that we've got to get Brogdon minutes thing. It could be a little bit of a combination of the two, but I don't think he was necessarily playing any worse than he had been. Like that Knicks game actually was probably his most productive game of the year, and that was the last game he started, which I also kind of wonder what message that sends to a young guy. Also, you have a game where you go 7 of 16, 4 of 8 from 3, have 4 rebounds, 2 assists, score 18 points, and then you're immediately kind of moved into a reserve role. Like I don't know how I would take that if I were a young
That's
impressionable
tough.
player. Yeah,
Yeah, especially when teams struggling. It's like I just balled out. What are we doing? And
right,
now I'm sitting again. Like I'm figuring this stuff out. Let's keep this rolling.
exactly.
All right. So I feel like I've been a little too negative. So what has kind of impressed you the most so far about Bub? And you can go all the way back to summer league too, but he's a really talented, ton of upside, player. Still very raw, but so far, what has kind of been the most impressive or surprising part about his game in a good way?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna give you some like GM speak almost and like some platitudes here, but they said from like day one in camp, like he's our most competitive player, and you've actually seen that from day one. And this is a Wizards team that like I think we all could look at this roster and if we're being objective, no, they would be bad because they're intended to be bad. And I said from day one, I didn't think they would surpass last year's win total of 15 games. So it's like I clearly saw they'd be bad, but I thought they'd be more competitive as a group than they've been, like scrappier and plucky, like and get out there and kind of give guys a little bit more of a scare than they have. And there's been a lot of games recently where it's like, oh, we're 14 minutes into the game and they're down 27 already. Like, but Bub is the one that doesn't seem discouraged by that. And
Okay.
they got beat pretty bad by Dallas last night. After we're recording this, and Bub in the post game was like, "Look, I'm trying not to be too mad about it. Like, it is what it is. This is kind of where we're at in our process, and I'm just trying to be grateful and humble. And I got to guard Kyrie Irving last night, so I learned some things, and I'm taking things that I can use and incorporate in the future. So I think he's got like the right mindset. He's not the like, oh well, it doesn't matter if we lose games, but it's like, hey, I understand that we don't want to lose, but this is kind of where we're at right now, and I'll take the good with the bad. So hearing those things to a man, they all talk about like he's scrappy, he'll get up in dudes. The first game of the season against Boston, he was chirping at Drew Holiday and they were bumping each other around, and you're like, okay, like this is, there's something here. And I think that this kind of franchise in general has lacked a little bit of like, the dog
Right.
mentality, air quotes, but that is sort of like the stereotypical Baltimore guard of like, like we're ready to take on all challengers. And I think injecting a little bit of that into this group overall is a good thing. They've gone out of their way to draft, like, by all accounts, nice guys. And you can do that, but they can't be nice guys on the court. And I
Yeah.
think he plays with enough of that chip. Like, this was a guy that was not projected to be not only not a one and done, but this is not like a five-star guy. And he was
Yeah.
unheralded until late in his high school recruiting process. So, like, this is a dude that's worked for everything he's got, he's earned everything he's gotten. And I think that's a really good thing to sort of carry over to the other rookies. Like, Koulibaly is sort of not the most directly assertive or aggressive guy on the offensive end. He seems to have confidence and swagger about his defense, so hopefully that carries over. But, like, Bub is not shy, and he's not sort of phased by the moment, and I think that's really good. Like, you can kind of ignore the percentages and the efficiency and things like that, but he's competing. He's also competed better on the defensive end. Like, I thought he was pretty bad defensively at Pittsburgh. I don't know what your I can't remember what your take on his defense was, but I don't think anyone watched him and thought, like, "Oh, this was a lockdown college basketball defender."
Yeah.
But he's tried like a hard and not shied away from big matchups this year, and I love seeing that.
Yeah, and my big thing with the defense for him last year at Pittsburgh was there was enough that you could tell he wanted to defend. Like,
Mhm. Right.
fundamentally, technically, schematically, he didn't always seem to know what he was supposed to be doing, or like consistently in the wrong spot, or figuring out how to navigate screens and stuff. And that there was a long way to go there.
Yep.
But more often than not, the effort seemed to be there, and the rotations, and
Mhm.
sometimes it was good, and when it was good, it looked really good.
Yep.
But there were also some big time lulls and low points too.
Mhm.
But yeah, and the selling point with him was always the pull up shooting, the playmaking, the rebounding. Um, but I always kind of felt like there was potential there to be at
Mhm.
least a net neutral
Yeah.
defender, like at worst, like at his peak. That's kind of what I would expect him to be on the defensive end. But the fact that he's already kind of being that competitive, showing that type of effort, showing that desire to defend is really, really encouraging.
What you just said is kind of where I thought he'd be. Is like, if he's just a solid enough defender, like, that's okay. But there's been opportunity, like, moments here where it's, like, really bad. And, like, that was just a train wreck possession. And I'm a bad, like, evaluator of defense in the NBA, especially because I can't tell enough about whose responsibility certain things actually were, or who screwed it up, or if we both screwed it up. So I don't pretend to, like, be able to grade them on any, like, super technical level. But uh, there are times where they look like a train wreck as a group, and there are moments where he's involved in that. But there's just enough of those sort of, like, positive flashes where, he'll cut off a bigger player and body him up, and you're just like, "Yeah, okay, like, this is a dude that you're not gonna run through." And it sort of reminds me of, like, I think Steph Curry over time became, like, a kind of underrated defender of, like, you
Hmm.
couldn't pick on him. Like, if Bub can be that kind of guy where people aren't like, "Okay, that's the guy we're targeting every time down the floor," like, that's fine. And I've seen enough there to think that that's definitely the case. And maybe he's got potential to be even better than that, because he's like a sturdily built guy and he's
Yeah,
not the most explosive. But if you're smart and you have feel and you can be good positioning, like, again, that's why I would be watching as much Malcolm Brogdon while they're together as possible, just because that's the kind of the guy I see him being, like that 15-point per game. Maybe can do some on ball stuff for you, but maybe the versatility off ball, if all those things improve, is great. But he's not gonna beat you by being like this freak athlete, or getting to the rim at will. Like, he's gonna have to do some pull-ups and things like that, and just beat you with savvy. And I think Brogdon, while healthy, was a pretty solid NBA defender, if not good. So maybe there's little tricks he can pick up along the way too.
for sure. Kind of on the flip side of the excitement. Sorry to get negative again here, but has there been anything that's been like, oh, this is a real problem, or like a glaring issue? Whether it's the defense or the shooting off the catch or the at rim finishing or any of that stuff, where like long term you're thinking this might be pretty difficult to overcome.
There are, like, one or two times, and this is sort of like jokingly or at least flippant, that I've, like, asked buddies, like, "Do you think he can dunk?" Like, other than like a totally wide open fast break, because
Right.
he just seems to shy away from contact going toward the rim in
Yeah.
the few situations where he actually does. And yeah, like I just like, is that a mindset thing, or is it I just physically I doesn't feel like he's in a position where he can challenge guys athletically? Like I don't really know what that is. Except he is like a pretty sturdily built, 19-year-old. Like I would think he could use his physicality a little bit more effectively. Like there are times when there are smaller guys than him guarding him, and doesn't ever really seem to take advantage of that. Like to me, I would think he'd be the perfect, get a guy on your hip and just kind of barrel to the hoop sort of player. And you never see that. Like there's never been one Wizards highlight of like, oh my gosh, like Bub even tried to put a guy on a poster or anything like that. I just like to see it once or time, like a few moments of reckless abandon. Would just be like a positive indicator for me.
Absolutely. All right. So you kind of talked about the young core before, and a few more numbers here, but when that young core of Bub, George, Sar, and Koulibaly are on the court without Jordan Poole,
Mhm.
the net rating is still a rough negative 12.5,
Sure.
but the offense is the offensive rating is up to 119.1, which is in the 83rd percentile, and their effective field goal rate is at 60.5, which is in the 98th percentile. Now they only
Mhm.
have 115 possessions of that, of those four guys being on the court together so far. The defense is awful. It's over defensive ratings over 131,
Mhm.
but the offense kind of running that seamlessly is really encouraging. So is this just a case to get more of that? The roster's just going to kind of have to turn over, unfortunately.
Yeah, I wonder about that a lot actually. And like I would expect the defense with basically like Koulibaly is like a rookie plus this year, right? Like
Yeah.
he didn't get a ton of run last year and was kind of like a fast tracked prospect into last year's draft. So to me, it's like basically a four rookie unit out there. Like you would expect that they're just going to get killed on that end.
Right.
But the ball movement is like so crisp when it's those four together and any other player that's not a total ball stopper. And I'll just leave out any names there and people can infer from that what they will. But I think that's like a sneaky, underrated component of all four players that they've tried to draft here is that they are unselfish guys. Like, there's obviously moments when any player is like, "Oh no, you shouldn't have taken that shot," but they seem to look and want to create for each other. And there was one particular possession or like stretch of possessions in a row earlier in the year, and I'm blanking on what game, but you had those four out there together, and they just pushed it in transition like 4 or 5 consecutive possessions. And like Keyshawn George hit a three. Then he like ball faked a three and kicked it to the corner. I think Kispert was the fifth. And he shot off the like the ball was just zipping all around the perimeter. And you're like, yes, we're playing 5-out basketball. The ball is actually moving. Someone didn't have to dribble 15 times before they got a shot off. Like that's what you want to see more of. So to me, like whatever you need to do to make that that group out there together, like, if that's really your future, play them as many minutes together now as you can. It's like we talked about earlier, like, this should be the year to experiment with, like, do these guys all fit together? Let them learn who wants the ball in what spots, like, they must be playing together a good amount and like, from even after summer league, but in, like, camp and in practice because they felt like they had chemistry already. So whatever you can do to mature that or speed that kind of growth up together, I think would be like the best interest of the franchise.
All right. So go lot of basketball left, obviously, what, like three-fourths of the season or so.
Yeah.
What are you kind of your expectations or hopes with Bub for the rest of the year?
Uh, I think just continuing to like keep up that competitiveness too. Like I mentioned, he said the right things last night, but they're gonna lose like probably a historical amount of games this year.
Yeah.
And that can take a toll, especially on young guys. And I think, staying healthy, but staying in the right mindset and mentally healthy is gonna be like it's a long season for everybody. And a young guy that didn't really play up until last year, what he played like 30 college games, 33, something in that ballpark. we're almost to that if you factor in like summer league and preseason games and stuff like that. So um, can he kind of hold up and continue to get a bunch of like as many minutes as possible? Just force feed him minutes on ball, like we talked about. And I don't really care about any of the percentages or any of
Yeah.
those things for this particular year. I would like to see him shoot, a little better from two and find a few ways to get himself just like a couple easier baskets. I think free throw rate would be a thing I would love to see just sort of them like emphasize with him. And maybe they do, maybe it's just not there yet. As a guy like him gets stronger, maybe he'll feel more confident doing that. But like only 3 free throws a game, I think is a disservice to him. And so finding ways to get him going downhill, things like that would be better, I would think, for everybody.
Makes sense. And yeah, the at rim stuff was weirdly an issue at Pitt too, where it's
Yep.
super inconsistent. And like you said, free throws are incredibly easy points to get and
Mhm.
can kind of get you in that rhythm.
Yep.
And he just never really capitalizes on it. And it's not like he's a tiny guy. He's listed like what, 6'4", 6'5".
Yeah.
Slender, skinny, but
Mhm.
what 19, 20-year old
Yep.
isn't. So yeah, I'm really I think he's gonna be a really kind of fascinating case study over these next couple of years as he gets stronger. It's like, all right, how much of that at rim finishing is influenced and kind of by that at least current lack of strength. That'll be really fascinating.
I thought he was at 2 free throws a game. He's actually at 1.3. I didn't
Oh,
have that in front of me. Like,
yeah, that's tough.
you can't be taking 1 free throw a game if you're him, and, yeah, he's skinny and gotta fill out, but he's also, like, a broad-shouldered guy. Like,
Yeah,
he's got, like, a little football build to him almost. Like, once he just kinda fills out that frame, I think he's a dude that, can kinda throw his weight around a little bit, hopefully, and maybe he just feels more confident about doing that. Like, I think he was kind of a late grower and stuff like that too, so sometimes guys that are used to being a little undersized, maybe they, like, shy away from trying to get, into the paint. I'm just they're guessing, they're grasping at straws here a little bit, but that's gotta be a point of emphasis for them.
absolutely. All right, as we kind of wrap this up, thoughts on Bilal Koulibaly's growth, initial impressions on Alex Sarr, Keyshawn George, any other fun tidbits with this Wizards team? I'll let you just kind of take it away and touch on, go in whatever direction excites you.
Yeah, I mean, Koulibaly was the one, like, there's been enough this year where when it looks really good, it's, like, very easy to get excited about, and I think you can see, like, the blueprint of where he's at. And there was, like, kind of a sluggish, maybe couple game start to the year, and then he hit a little stride for a while, and you thought, like, "Oh, okay, like, now he's figured it out, and now he's turned it on," and we've seen some real regression. Kyle Kuzma came back, now Brogdon's back, and last night's or the other night's game against Dallas, like he missed every field goal attempt he took, but he was back up to 10 field goal attempts. And like, that's just alone. I want to see that from him
Yeah,
every game the rest of the year. I think it's awesome. Like, Luka Doncic last night was like, hey, like this guy anticipated every move I was going to make. And like 2 or 3 years in, you start to learn people's tendencies, but like, he's going to be a really, really good player on that end of the floor. Like, he gets that sort of like, recognition from the top players in the league, like pretty much universally after they play Washington. And I think that's awesome to hear those superlatives on one side of the ball. But we've kind of reverted back into like a lot of him standing in the corner kind of stuff. And like we were talking about with Bub, like this is the year to workshop and just clear out a side of the floor for him and see what he can do with guys. And there have been a few moments where it's like, oh, okay, this is better. He can only drive right now. I think teams figured that out pretty quickly. That was a real challenge here in Washington with Denny Avdia for a long time. Like he could only go one way. And once teams understood that, it made him really hard to guard. And especially if you're not hitting enough jump shots, to kind of keep teams honest. Like they were just sort of sagging off and playing in one direction. So I think the shooting will have to come around similarly. Like once it did for Denny, like he really popped and did
yeah,
some of these other things. And that's great. But, it just seems like a good dude. And the skills are clearly like a little sharper than they were last year. The handle is a little tighter, at least going one way. The jumper looks a little more fluid and like a little less dip on the release and stuff like so there's some things like they're clearly doing with him. I just want to see like the confidence sort of like matriculate to offense as well too. Like he's like openly like, talking trash to other guys
Yeah.
on about like, oh, I can lock anybody down, like that kind of stuff. And the other night, the Milwaukee put Dame Lillard on him for like a large portion of the game, and he didn't like. I don't remember him like attacking Damian Lillard once. And at this point in Lillard's career, I would say he's like definitely below average NBA defender. And you're cool Molly, you're 5 inches taller than him, way more athletic. Whether you got the tightest handle or not, you should be able to like take advantage of some of that. So that would be big. Keyshawn George, he looks like he can shoot. Got to make some shots at some point here too. They're getting actually pretty good looks for him. He's made just a putrid percentage of them so far. But there's just like little flashes of things from him too. He's got a little wiggle to him. He's defended better than I thought he would too. Again, same kind of rookie things, like get beat backdoor here or something. But he's held up pretty well. And I think for him, you're starting to see a little slippage on the defensive end as he struggled a little offensively too. He's another guy that the minutes took a hit when Kyle Kuzma came back, and he'd had a pretty good stretch there. So I think for all of those guys, I'd just like to see them freed up to do their thing. And this is like a corny analogy, but like if anybody watched the movie Moneyball, like there was a situation where like they had to trade a player to force the coach to play a certain other player, like
Yeah, that's
you
kind
almost
of almost what I was hinting at with like the how do we get this four-man grouping more minutes? Like
exactly.
who,
Like you
who
might
needs to
have to
leave?
save them from themselves here and like just clear dudes out to be able to make that be enough of a point of emphasis. So we'll see. The Alex R one I already mentioned. My big complaint there is just like letting him shoot threes at a Klay Thompson-esque rate. Doesn't really make sense. And I'm always of the opinion, this is like maybe an old school basketball take, but like work your way out from the hoop and add more complexity. And if you can't shoot, like why don't we design a few plays for you, that put you in a success, whatever we think you can be successful at offensively, why don't we do more of that? And you missing open pick and pop 3 after 3 can't really be the best we can do for you. So that worries me a little bit so far.
I know I said we weren't going to dive into SAR here, but I think that's a
A little
really kind
bit's
of
okay.
fascinating point. So yeah, I mean, I'm going to break my own rule here. But what kind of where do you stand on that? It's a very kind of thin line of letting a young guy play through his mistakes and develop in real time, because nothing's more valuable in terms of development than actual minutes and playing.
Mhm.
But at the flip side of that, you can develop a lot of really, really bad habits and
Yeah.
kind of shatter confidence and, potential growth by continuously failing over and over and over again and being put in situations that aren't conducive to what you're actually good at. And
Mhm.
SAR's kind of always been a theoretical shooter. There's some mechanical stuff that needs fixing, and the results weren't there all year last year.
Mhm.
But when he kind of got into the mid range and like low post and short roll stuff, it got more effective. So I don't know, but it seems it seems harmful to just kind of let him
Yeah.
solely play this finesse perimeter based game.
It's what he did in summer league,
Yeah,
and I was like, "It's summer league, like, I can
yeah,
dismiss that for 5 games," but, we've seen enough sample size now that it's clearly a thing they're not only okay with, but trying to emphasize, and I think the best version of him is a capable guy that allows you to play 5 out and things like that, but, uh, it's not even playing through mistakes. Like if he's getting wide open threes, he should take them. So it's not a mistake to take it. He's just shown he can't make them yet.
right.
So at some point, like,
So is it more so a mistake just on the coaching staff of
yeah, I mean,
relentlessly putting him in those positions to take these shots that he's kind of continuously proving he can't make?
that's kind of where I'm at too, or
Okay.
at least find a way to get him like whatever you're doing film wise. And again, maybe they're just experimenting enough still here to figure out what he can or can't do. So you have
Right.
like real things to draw some trends from.
For sure.
There are some situations where, like, his feet are set and he looks ready to go and he'll drill a 3 and you're like, "Oh, okay." Like, maybe whatever happened there, let's recreate, that. And then there are other times like he'll back up behind the 3-point line to take a three. And it's like, maybe you would have just been better taking a long, inefficient 18-footer, but at least it would have been fluid than like trying to force something. So I wrestle with that personally of like, yeah, you need him to make those things eventually to be the best version of himself, but do we need him to make them right now, or could we find a few ways to get him a couple easy baskets? Like to me, he's going to have an advantage quickness wise over a lot of the guys guarding
Yeah.
him. Not everybody, but he's also got a pretty decent handle. Like he'll grab and
Mhm.
go a little bit, and we can't find a way to use him as a driver. I would love to see maybe some kind of like inverted pick and roll where like he's actually the guy with the ball. Like they have not done that a single time to my knowledge this entire year where he initiates that with anybody. So this is the kind of stuff I'd be trying. Like when people talk about like throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, like that's what I'd want to see them take a few more like swings at. Of can he do those sorts of things? Can we get him going downhill that way? Would be interesting. I know he's not really like a lob threat kind of guy, but he's not unathletic. He's pretty long. Like just because he hasn't been used that way a lot thus far doesn't mean we shouldn't try to find ways to do that. Like there was a reasonable like, and at least they made some attempt last year to do like Gafford as the roller with Poole, and they weren't as effective as they should have been. But like I don't know, like Sar couldn't try to take a few of those sets that they had for Gafford. So it's just kind of weird. That's like the word I keep using for it. Just so I don't know what is he? What do they view him as? How do you reconcile those two things? The one anecdote I go back to was a couple years ago when Benedict Mathurin was a rookie for the Pacers. Like they were like, here are 5 plays we took from the Arizona playbook where you were most successful. They are now a part of our playbook.
Yeah.
Like, what was Alex Sarr good at? I mean, like we drafted this guy number 2, right? So presumably there were some things offensively he did better than others. I think he's like a really good short roll passer
Yeah.
already for a rookie. Like, let him do that. Just like let him. Those are the kind of mistakes I'd want to see him play through. If he throws the ball away a little bit, like so be it. And he's got high turnovers there. Like I don't care. I'd rather see him turn the ball over because he missed a pass, somebody cutting off of him than like clanking another brick three.
Weird is always an ideal adjective to use with
Yeah.
your professional franchise. But Matt, this was awesome. I really appreciate the insight and you taking the time. Please plug away. Tell everyone where they can find your work, how they can support you, all that good stuff.
Uh, yeah, if you're an absolute masochist and you want to hear more about the Wizards than you've just heard here, it's Believe in Wizards. It's myself and former Wizard center Jihadi White going about once a week. And then we'll do pre and post game shows for a large portion of the game. It's a little hard to do them for every game, just knowing how they play themselves out. But come check us out and just honestly plug you guys because like this is something I listen to a lot. Obviously, as a Wizards fan, there's a lot of opportunity to pay attention to the draft. So what you guys are doing with No Ceilings overall has been awesome to watch. And yeah, I appreciate all the content because it keeps us sort of sane to have that hope for the future. And looking forward to following this particular draft cycle even harder than most, given the Wizards presumably have locked themselves into a top 4 pick here already.
Matt does awesome work. I also love some of the local kind of college hoop coverage that you guys do as well. Go support Matt. Really good work all around. Matt, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Really appreciate Matt taking the time. I loved his insight. A lot of really good stuff there. Make sure to go support him. He does really good work covering the Wizards. But we're moving on to next week. Let's bring up the wheel, figure out who we have coming up. All right, here's the wheel. Let's go. We'll spin it. I love the sound effect. They're just magical. Oh, should be a fun one. De Silva from the Orlando Magic. Absolutely love it. De Silva's getting a ton of run, up and down efficiency numbers, but getting a big time opportunity for a Magic team that's playing really well. So we will yet again get another really insightful, connected guest who really knows their stuff to kind of talk us through Tristan Da Silva and the rest of that Orlando Magic team, and just kind of how their season's going so far. If you guys have been enjoying the series, or have recommendations, likes, dislikes, potential guests that you would love to hear from and get on the show, let me know. But in the meantime, subscribe, rate, review, all that good stuff. NoCeilingsNBA.com. I'm Tyler Metcalf. You can follow me at TMetcalf11. Until next week, see ya.